So I'll go ahead and kick things off. Thank you for joining us today for our Organizational Leadership Roundtable. My name is Kayleen Babel. I am Manager of Customer Communications and Marketing at BullseyeEngagement. And I'm also joined by our Chairman and CEO, Adil. And we're very excited for this conversation about driving employee engagement. And I'm sure it will provide some highly valuable insights given the knowledge and experience of our guests today. So it is my pleasure to introduce the guests of today's roundtable. We have two very well-respected business professionals and keynote speakers. First, John Fikany, who is founder and CEO of the Fikany Group. He has 27 years of experience in the technology industry, including 13 years as Vice President of Microsoft's largest sales organization globally, and 8 years as Vice President at Oracle Corporation. We also have Kevin Martin, the Chief Research Officer at the Institute for Corporate Productivity. He and his team research and explore a broad range of topics, including talent risk management, corporate culture, human capital strategy, among many other things. So thank you both so much for spending a bit of time with us today. I would love to jump right into some questions and get this discussion going. So we'll go ahead and start with a fairly broad topic, and maybe I'll pass this one to Kevin first, and then feel free, John, to add in any points. So how can leaders equip their teams to improve employee engagement?
I'm vastly more interested in learning what John has to say on this than hearing what I have to say on this topic. But it's a great question, Kayleen. And, what's interesting is, I look at the question, it's like, how can leaders equip the team to drive employee engagement? And, I think back to a lot of research that we've done on the topic. And, there are certain things that stand out of factors that really drive engagement. So engagement, I guess if we agree to a definition of it, I think a lot of people, conventional wisdom suggests it's employees or workers, let's say in general, that are willing to give the extra effort, right? It's that discretionary effort to go above and beyond. And there are a few things that we see from our research that really stand out as leading indicators of employee engagement. And one of those leading indicators is the broader area of development. And, how well and how effective are organizations and leaders at providing, development opportunities that can include rotational assignments. So mobility is big, in this COVID world, geographic moves and physical moves are not really all that plausible right now or possible in that regard. But that's a narrow view of mobility. A more broadened view of mobility are what kind of developmental experiences can people have? Think about experiences such as even relationships. What are key relationships that people need to have, and how can I broker those connections for people to get more connected within the organization with people of, strong influence? Other types of experiences can be rotational experiences of experience working with others cross-functionally across the organization or into the ecosystem of the organization on a business or cross-functional type of project team, and getting that type of experience. Another type of experience can be kind of like an exposure type of, I'll call it assignment. So think about, providing someone with, someone who's an up and comer in the organization with the opportunity to get exposure to someone who's a ranking officer in the firm, or someone who might even be at that board level, who's, as they're more middle range, but going up within that organization. Those types of things are really, really critical. And so having customized, personalized, development plans that really fit the need of the business, fit the need of the individual, those are really, really critical. I'll just stop there because I can, there's other things as well, but I'd love to be able to, get John's reaction to that and see where we take this.
Well, where we take it is I'm taking notes. I mean, every time that Kevin speaks, I'm taking notes. So I'll start with saying I'm honored to be here with, I consider to be two extremely respected thought leaders on this subject. I think anything around human capital, a deal in your background, along with Kevin, you have the right people on here. So I'm honored to be with these folks here. So thank you, Colleen, for allowing me to participate. This is a very passionate subject to me. I think this has separated my teams in the past from the pack and really differentiated us, not only internally within Microsoft or Oracle or Quicken Loans, but in the industry. And it wasn't until after I left Microsoft and to start to really understand how we are able to capture the heart and minds of our teams so much. And it's not like we focused on this term employee engagement. We just did the right thing. And as I look back and I study this stuff now and I research, I'm like, wow, we did a lot of things pretty good. We did some things I'd like to do over again, but we understood the impact of it. And now as a advisor and a coach to a lot of different companies and a lot of different executives, I get a real frequently asked question, whether it's from some of my clients or from some of the executives I coach today, which is, what would be the number one thing you would suggest to drive growth in the organization? And a lot of them would expect me to say things like, well, it's your leadership or your talent, or it's about, focusing on your customer more. And I get into more of the details of the operational things maybe, but my answer always is and always has been is employee engagement. And the reason why I say that is I can't tell you how many companies, it surprises me, that don't have this as their number one priority. Because they always talk about on their websites and on their keynote speeches about their most important assets, their people. But then I don't see them, as many companies as we should see, as backing that up in the way that they treat this subject. And so I think this just needs to be front and center. Employment engagement is a growth strategy, period. And it's your number one growth strategy. And we'll say, what about talent acquisition? Because it's all about talent. So you already have the talent, right? And you hired great people, I'm assuming. You're just not getting the most out of them. And so when I think of this term, employee engagement, I think of this as, how do you enable the environment and unleash human potential? And you do that through caring. So this isn't about profit. This is about people. And I think when you do the right things, when you have people as your North Star, doing the right thing with your people, and all people, including your customers and partners, success will chase you. So back to your original question, which was, how can leaders equip their teams to improve engagement? I'll list a couple things that I thought about in the subject. First of all, is clarity on the impact and consequences of having great employee engagement or not. And you need to have that with your leadership teams. That's very important, right? And for them to understand why we're doing this. And by the way, this growth I'm talking about is growth for both. It's growth from your company's perspective, but it's also growth for the individual. When you do this right, everybody grows and benefits, including your customers, because when your employees are fired up and engaged, your customers feel that impact. So number one, just making sure that you have clarity of the impact of this conversation. Secondly, I would say to enable them and to get our leaders equipped for this, you have to work on the empathy muscle. Because I think sometimes we've gone to atrophy in this category because we get our work hats on and we're just so intense about our work stuff that we forget the people stuff sometimes. And really, I think if you had to define the word employee engagement, first word that comes to my mind is caring, right? And caring is all about empathy and just truly understanding your team. And this is a leadership conversation where it's not just understanding your team at work, it's understanding your whole person that you're dealing with on your team, right? Outside of work, right? So that's important, right? Next thing, you have to structure for success. You have to institutionalize some of these things. So, setting the right expectations up front on both sides here, because I think engagement implies a mutual agreement. People came to your company for a reason and a promise. and you as an employer have to deliver on that promise. But you also hired them with this promise. So engagement's a two-way side thing, I think. So setting the right expectations, I think, is important. And then just equipping the team to be successful is making sure the leaders institute some basic things like, I get back to the people side of this, but empowerment and trust, to let them know that we're not here to drive our employees to do certain things. We're there to unleash them and let them drive the ship at times, and empower and trust them, and create that environment, that safe environment that we're talking about. I think another way to enable the improvement of this subject here is to keep reinforcing and keep making sure that there's clarity and alignment to your company's purpose. When there's clarity, alignment to your purpose and to your value system, and those guiding principles are critical. Sometimes we forget that. We get caught in the battle and we go, 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 go. But when you get that and you bring that home again, you have that continuous reinforcement of that, people know why they came to that company, right? And then I'll just reinforce what I said earlier. I think the evolution of this conversation of employee engagement was, having a close connection with them while they're in their work world, but there is no work world anymore. There's this blend of work-life balance, and there's this two worlds that have combined now, where if you really want engagement, you have to care and empathize and really intentionally want to and proactively want to be closer to what's going on in their lives here. And when you do that, and I can say this from experience, when we've driven this way about aligning to our core value system and to our purpose of why we exist, which is more than just selling software. When I was at Microsoft, for example, it was about making a difference in the world and giving back and helping our clients succeed. When you think like that and you demonstrate that and you do these things, I'll add one last thing, is the importance of being out in the community and making a difference. The pride that brings to your team to know that you're doing more than expected and you're giving back and you're utilizing this machine. We'll use Microsoft as an example, this huge, powerful machine that wants to participate in not only you being successful, but the communities that we get to serve, including our clients, but the communities they live in. That changes the game. So it's getting back to a lot of these basics and institutionalizing them, but it all begins with the heart and minds of your team. And that starts with caring and empathy. And I think if we can have our teams focus more on those kind of things, it'll improve the engagement process. And I will tell you, a lot of times when I'm talking to Kevin, he reinforces and reminds me about this employee experience conversation, which I think that that employee engagement's all about. I think the better that you provide these environments for them to have a great experience, the more engaged the people will be. My Uber statement in that whole answer really is focus on the people, not the profit. When you focus on people, the profit will chase you. I'll stop there, and hopefully that answered your question.
That's actually outstanding. First of all, thank you for joining, Kevin and John, both. Kevin, before Kayleen takes us to the next question, let me take you to a word technology conference way back when I first heard you deliver one of the keynotes. And let me ask you if you could reflect just for a minute or so that those companies who maintain the level of engagement in tanking economy, what happens to those, and those companies who lose the level of engagement, what kind of impact they face on their bottom line. And just thought about it, as John mentioned about focus on people, not profits. That's very relevant to what we're discussing here. And I believe a piece of your research, Kevin, was all about that.
Well, it's interesting, I want to deal, if you take the frame that John laid out, which is, looking and saying, employee engagement is derivative, it's an outcome. And it's an outcome of what, right? I mean, there's organizations, this is an interesting thing. I think this is going to be a very interesting challenge and opportunity for organizations. Take, for instance, the SEC ruling that they came out with at the end of August, right? Mandating certain human capital disclosures. And it's really just around headcount. You'll see where I'm going with this in just a moment. But they're encouraging companies to report on certain other things, but they're basically saying full disclosure around things that are material to your business. And I can't help but think about an organization out there that says, employee engagement, go to their website. Employee engagement is number one for us. This is what we're all about. Your investors, the smart ones, have been actually moving towards this anyway. They're going to be coming in droves now and saying,
Yeah.
if that's material to your business, you need to be able to convince us that you have high levels of engagement. So how are you not just measuring that? The more important thing is, what are the levers that you're pulling in order to drive that and enable that? And I think that this is going to really present, again, this is taking something that is so critically important, and now it's putting it in companies and saying, you've been saying it all along, prove it. Show us what you're doing. Show us how much you know about it. Show us where, what are the mechanisms? How are you holding yourselves accountable around this, et cetera? So if you look back, going back to your question, Adil, which is the organization, in great times, they've got high levels of engagement, but in tough times, what are you doing in order to maintain that? I want to kind of reflect back to where John was at, which is that high level piece. We published a report earlier this year, and I think this new ruling by the SEC is just absolutely just a massive stamp on the validation of this, which is there is absolutely a new corporate currency, and that new corporate currency is the alignment of your org's purpose, how it's manifested or supported by its culture, and all of that, your purpose, the strength and alignment of your purpose and your culture, why you do what you do, and what people experience as a result of what's rewarded, condoned, et cetera. All of that becomes your identity. That's your perception. That's how people talk about your firm. That's your brand. And so the best organizations, when they lead through crisis, when they lead through down times, they understand that equation, and they have to make tough decisions. But more often than not, what they're not doing is they're not cutting back on really important things. If you start thinking about the levers, right? You can always have that really strong purpose that's got to resonate with people, your culture. What are you doing? The leaders have such an influence on the culture of the firm, et cetera. But there are certain levers that we've seen the best organizations that actually double down on in tough times. And one of those areas they double down on, this is why I started with what I did, is development. It's not letting go of that particular area. And I will not name the company, but there's a Fortune 300 company out there that when they had a new CEO a few years ago, came in with a people first strategy, and the board scoffed at that. Very, an older school board kind of scoffed at that. But the CEO who came up within the business always led with that, no matter what function or line or level they were at. They doubled down on that for the entire company. And 3-4 years later, their business performance was way outpacing any of their competitors, et cetera. And during certain downtimes, like the economic downturn, they doubled down on investment in development. And I think that is a critical area. Companies have got to not lose sight of the longer term. How are you constantly enabling your talent to go up the value equation, to stay relevant, right? And to drive your business going forward? That's a key element of it. But I wanted to kind of tie that back to that overarching bigger formula, Adil.
No, thank you. Thank you for connecting the dots, and that's why I asked. And obviously, our purpose at Bullseye is to drive that connectivity between the leadership and employees and leadership, and try to remove as many filters and have that continuous dialogue. So the vision is very clear, purpose is very clear. And obviously in the new norms, we are driving that communication and taking folks away from this end of the year conversation. Millennials, as you know, more than anyone else, probably, John and you both,
Right.
They love to see and feel, and in some ways, they demand instant feedback from the leadership. How am I doing?
Right.
They can't wait to hear from their immediate supervisor, but also from the leadership. Are we adding value?
Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah. Kelly?
Lots of excellent points there. And I think to tie it back to John, I think you mentioned getting your leadership on board with pursuing employee development and continuing up these initiatives. The next question I'd like to lead into is, what exactly can organizational leaders do to achieve these outcomes that recent polls have shown? So organizations with highly engaged employees are producing fewer quality incidents, they are more profitable, they have higher productivity, et cetera. And I know you just laid out a huge foundation for us of different ways that they can go about doing this, but maybe what are some specific trends or tactics that you see organizations with highly engaged employees using to achieve these outcomes?
These numbers are coming from Gallup, and this is the most recent reported from Gallup, by the way.
Yeah, and they're scary, actually. I mean, I've been seeing this Gallup stuff and other studies that are out there that I just can't believe them. They're hard to comprehend when someone says to me that 70% of the people in an average organization is disengaged. And the numbers that I've said, I just read some study the other day that this is costing US companies, combined $450 billion in productivity. This lack of engagement. It's hard to comprehend. In fact, I will tell you, years ago, I've keynoted for many different SHRM conferences, right? And these rooms are filled with 1,000 HR directors and senior people in HR. And I had to ask them, I was just blown away by this. And I said, is it possible? And I referenced Gallup. I said, is it possible? 300 million people in that survey globally, right? Is it possible that there could be approximately 70% of people disengaged? And I see a show of hands here. I mean, there's 1,000 of you in a room. It's what you do for a living. And they're laughing. I'm like, this isn't funny. I don't think it's funny, right? But they're laughing at my position. I'm like, is this real? I mean, I couldn't comprehend it because I didn't feel that in my organization. I just didn't. And, based on the results of what we would do year after year after year, and I'm not saying that we were the best in the world at this stuff here, so don't get me wrong. But there's no way we had 70% of people, or we couldn't have done what we did every year. And the answer that came back from this group of HR professionals was, no, that number's correct. That on average, there's about 30% of the people out there on the average organization that they would consider engaged, and about 70% were disengaged. And by the way, of those percentage of disengaged, about 50% of those we'll say are just passively disengaged. And then there's this other group we'll call 18 to 20% that are proactively disengaged. I mean, what is proactively disengaged? I mean, they're actually trying to hurt the company. They're like cancer. And like, yeah, that's right. I'm like, oh my God. So that's what started to get me more excited about learning about this. Like, this can't be possible, but it's true. And I told you the impact, but Kevin, as a researcher, he has the statistics that shows the impact of what it means when you have a disengaged environment and the impact of an engagement. I had a client one time that says to me, what do you think the number one role is of the CEO of a privately held or a publicly held company? And I went through my reasoning for that. And then one of the last reasons I gave was shareholder value. It wasn't the first, because that used to be the old school way. It was one of the last things I put on my list. I said shareholder value. And they go, okay, well, how do you grow shareholder value? So I took the question, I reverted it back to them. I said, well, how do you think you grow shareholder value. Because, well, so I had to dissect this, I decouple it. So, well, shareholder value comes from the stock price, right? There you go. Where does the stock price come from? I said it comes from the street's position on their confidence of your company and where it's going to be going in the future, because the stock price is about the future. So it's their confidence in your ability to perform and continue to innovate in the future. And I said, well, where does innovation come from? I asked them. Innovation comes from your people. And I said, well, time out. It doesn't come from your people when 70% of them are disengaged. It comes from only that 30% that are engaged. So you want to grow strategy, you want to grow your shareholder value, obvious to me is increase your level of engaged people. And by the way, I'll tell you, that 30% of these engaged people that, let's say, Gallup talks about already, that it polls, I would even do a closer segmentation of that to say that what you really want to get to is all-in engagement. There's a difference between I'm engaged to all-in engaged. Now, I'm an all-in engaged kind of person. When I was at Microsoft, I always wore our logos. I felt sorry for people on the planes that had to sit next to me because immediately when they asked where I work, I couldn't wait to tell them, and I'd go into a demo on my new Surface device or the new application that came out. I was just all in. And you know, you mentioned a really cool thing, Kevin, in the beginning. It's so important of this conversation is discretionary time. Everybody has a certain amount of discretionary time. And when you see an all-in engaged person, these are the folks that not only work the hours expected, when they go home and they put their kids to bed and everything else, they on their own get back online. They're not told to do that. They give more than their time. And so, you know, back to your original question, and sorry for the long lead in, but I'm just blown away how these numbers you just showed, but I validated that, and Kevin's probably validated that. And that's why I'm so surprised that more people don't take this seriously and have more tangible things that they put in place to operationalize this conversation. So, you know, I'll get back to some soft stuff that you might consider soft stuff, but what organizational leaders can do to achieve these similar outcomes, more positive outcomes, it begins with this caring and this trust and empowerment. It's creating these cultures that I think are less control cultures and fear cultures and more safe cultures. They're encouraging cultures, by the way, that not only expect, they're almost like demanding for more participation in a positive way, that everybody's included, and that they are expected to participate in the creativity, innovation process, and growth of the company. And they have a voice, and they matter, and that their voices are heard and there's action taken from them. And I think that there needs to be more frequently communication and connectivity with the employees, and that doesn't just happen. And I want to touch a little bit on what you said, Adil, earlier, because I've had the opportunity to see your application, and it's a lot different than what I was used to having to work with at different big companies, to be honest with you. You know, one of the areas that drives, I would call it disengagement, if you want, or creates the morale issue or people to be further away, is that when you don't provide them technology and tools for them to be able to do their job more efficiently and effective. And in this area of engagement, how do you make that so simple and easy for people and leaders or the employees to participate in that two-way communication? And what I think what you've developed over there with Bullseye is exactly what I wish I would have had when I was at Microsoft, to be honest with you. And just because of its simplicity and its intuitiveness to how that employee experience and that leadership experience really goes on today. It's a modernized approach toward what people need today to drive this conversation of engagement. You can't just talk about it in the terms that I did. Sooner or later, it's got to get down to how do you operationalize and institutionalize certain things, right? And one of them is to provide a tool that allows you to do this in a simpler manner, and where it just becomes part of your daily experience. We live in a digital lifestyle today. So the ability to be able to stay connected to your employees needs to be the way that you run your life and work your life, and whether it's at work or at home or whatever. We're seeing this during this pandemic, where it has such an impact, where there shouldn't be that big of a hiccup and gap because people are working at home. Highly engaged companies have been the ones that have promoted remote working from the start. I mean, because this demonstrates this empowerment and trust thing I'm talking about. I know you're going to be working. I expect that. We have certain things that we're going to do together and expectations. So I trust you. And so that's one thing. I trust you, but you got to empower me with the tools to allow me to do what I need to do. And I think what Bullseye does very well is it provides those capabilities of someone to be able to stay connected on any device at any time. And it's integrated in a way that the whole work experience is surrounding that. And so I compliment you on what you've built in that integrated process.
Thank you.
I don't want to take away time from Kevin because he has more statistics on different things here. But as we go on, I'll get into very specific things in your future questions that you have of what my teams and I have done to operationalize this. And I'll get extremely specific of things that we did and that we do that I think might be helpful to share with this audience. Kevin, what's your perspective on this?
Thank you. Thank you, John. Just wanted to interject one thought. I wasn't going to actually bring operational or tactical stuff, but to your point, we blazed the trail of providing check-in technology at least a year before first Accenture article came out, or Wall Street Journal, or any other articles that hit press. And majority of our customers utilizing that, and they're finding out that in this COVID world and the new norms, that the check-ins is a great way to communicate on daily, weekly basis and stay connected with the remote workforce. I'll stop there. Just wanted to add.
If I could add to that, please, for a second here, because I think it's an interesting conversation. The companies that have disengaged employees are the ones that have these kind of tools or technologies that are meant to inspect versus inspire. That bothers me. Because I played with a lot of these tools throughout my years of leadership at Oracle or Microsoft or Quicken, where the technology or the process was designed to measure people versus motivate, to inspect versus inspire, to count versus coach. And that's not what these tools should be meant to do. And especially, and that's the difference between management and leadership, by the way, right? And that's what's caused a huge degradation in engagement, in my opinion, is this pandemic of more and hyper competitiveness that has happened over the past 10 years has forced us into promoting people that were really good at getting stuff done. And they get in these leadership positions, and what do? They manage, they count. And then that's not what we need. We need more leaders. And these check-ins are not designed to inspect. They should be designed to be able to give and to support and to coach. And the environments and the technology that's enabling that makes a difference in terms of engagement. There's nothing worse than working remotely with bad technology. It just frustrates the hell out of your team. And especially if it's done in an improper way that's designed to cause fear and to measure versus to inspire and to empower people. So I'll get off my soapbox on that, but I'm pretty passionate about those kind of cultures and environments. Kevin, I'm sorry.
Outstanding point, another outstanding point, because we need to give people enough credit and we shouldn't be challenging their intelligence, because people can see through if you're trying to inspire or trying to inspect.
Yes. One last thing to that is that I want to see more leaders catching their employees doing something good versus intentionally trying to catch them doing something bad or wrong. And I think sometimes we just get so off track of, I want to have tools and technology with gamification and different things like that are recognizing and rewarding people. And that just takes a culture to a completely different level. It becomes viral in a positive way, right? But there's too many tools and technology that are all about management. And listen, there's a time and a place for that. You have to have some kind of accountability, right? When you set the proper expectations, I think, and you let go to let grow, and you trust your team, you'll find they're going to surprise you. They're going to do more than you thought. But again, you're getting me on a subject I get pretty passionate about. I want to pass the ball to Kevin. Kevin's got more research on this subject. Kevin, what do you think?
Well, I want to build on what John said when he said, I'm going to switch this back to the soft side. It's interesting. We published a blog just the other day, and part of the blog post stated that unfortunately, it really took a pandemic for companies to really place, overtly place value on the softer side of leading. You know, we had, you know, I'll quote a stat from like 6 years ago, you know, research we did, you know, 6 years ago on global leadership effectiveness. The data that came back from it, the key finding was this, or the overarching key finding was that the softer side of leading has the greatest variability on leadership effectiveness. Right. And, you know, and now fast forward to the pandemic and the social unrest around the killing of George Floyd, et cetera. You've got, how many times do you hear people talk about, oh, it's great to see leaders that are finally listening. They're starting meetings out by just, you know, connecting with people versus just telling them what needs to get done. And our CEO seems human now, you know, and this and that. And you know, yeah, you know, it's easy to be, you know, to be a little sarcastic around that, or a cynic in the background and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it took so long. But you know what? It's here now. People are finally realizing that. And hopefully companies don't lose track of it. Because I think, you know, one thing we haven't discussed yet, but it has to be on the table. And this is going to be a major indicator of employee engagement going forward, is going to be the overall workforce well-being. And
totally agree.
You know, and we were interviewing just a few months ago the head of HR for one of the largest companies in the entire world, millions of employees, and she said on that call, she said, you know, when you think about it, I think that at the end of all of this, we're going to look back and think that, or we're going to say that the well-being of our workforce is our firm's greatest asset. That's huge. That's a huge, very telling statement right there. Totally. And so if you think about the softer side of leading, and John was talking about empathy and just listening, 100%, you know, it's so clear, you know, that's a huge reason why he achieved such success, you know, and as a practitioner leader for years and years. I would say, you know, one of the things that we're seeing with our research that companies really need to be looking at is, how do you train your people leaders to be better attuned to the overall well-being of the workforce? You know, think about this. Yeah. You know, we wrote about this, you know, at the very beginning before the pandemic. And it's like, you know what, at the end of the day, be careful that isolation isn't the hidden victim of COVID-19. You know, people, especially in this remote work environment, the social connectedness, just from a research perspective, just to, you know, for yucks and chucks, I'll just throw it out there. The empirical connection of social connections to the overall well-being of a worker, to the overall sense of engagement, is so clear and pronounced. So let's just say that that's table stakes. So what are things that leaders can do in order to be better attuned to the overall workforce well-being and enable and hopefully contribute to a better well-being, right? And that's things what John was talking about. I love what John was saying around things like, it's about inspire versus inspect, right? Where's the trust in all of this? Where are you calling out the positives along things? What I would also suggest on top of that is clarity. There's a lot right now, you know, the difference between companies that have had remote workers before the pandemic and remote workers in the pandemic is that for many workers, there is a severe sense of isolation where they're unable to leave their homes. Think about people who are living by themselves. Think about working parents who have kids who are home from school or couldn't go to camps, and you're trying to work while you've got incredible distractions happening. As I was interviewing the CEO of one of the largest UK-based companies recently, and I love what he said. He said, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats, folks, you know, and that's 100% true. So training your leaders on signals, you know, of whether someone is, you know, withdrawing or, you know, maybe whatever it might be, that's big. And we're seeing the leading organizations really taking a development emphasis on that. So I just wanted to comment on the softer side of leading that is hugely critical, but keep in mind also the impact of that on the overall that's incredibly important in shaping as well as being attuned to the overall well-being of the workforce.
Yeah, that well-being of the workforce is absolutely going to be an area of focus in a different way than it has been in the past. In the past, I think we called it WHO or OHI was Organizational Health Index, right? So like big companies, they say, well, what's your health index? And then you look at the metrics and it says, that's the metrics for the organizational's health. And that doesn't seem right to me, because they're measuring business stuff and not maybe the right things. And I think where you're going right now is spot on, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, it's not just about them at work, right, Kevin? It's about really, truly, it's almost, you gotta, not to take it from a technology, you almost have to have CRM for your own people. You're selling to your customers. Or why wouldn't you just use that same mindset of this, team member relationship management system, maybe, right? I don't know, maybe I've just started a new software company, Kevin, let's do it, right? So, but the idea is, and I think that's what Adil has. I think that's what he built, right? With Bullseye, it's about team member relationship management and going about it in the right way to bring this overall, and I just want to go back, it's not just while they're at work. It's this truly understanding of what's going on in their whole life. And if you don't, there's a boundary that you got to walk a little bit, because I know there's going to be some certain people in HR, you can't go there. I was always an HR problem though, because I was a lean-in kind of person when it came to the people side. I just probably wanted to do as much as I can to learn as much about them so I can help them. But there's probably a little boundary in there that you can't go too far, but you want to offer it. You want to lean in that you're open to hearing and helping. And if they lean in too and they enroll themselves in that conversation, you want to be there for that. And I think that whole body, that whole life that they're going through, especially, and you're finding it out right now with this COVID thing, and which is just terrible. But as people are at home right now, you're recognizing, wait a minute, I didn't even know you had kids. You got a dog? Is that a dog barking? Like, you've worked here with this person for 10 years. You didn't know they had kids. You didn't know they have a dog. That was a turning point at Microsoft, by the way, when Satya Nadella brought the senior leadership team together, the SLT, and they brought an outside person in for this personal performance stuff. And he made them go around the circle and have a conversation, a more personal one. And there's literally people in the book that Satya wrote that really, really rediscovered the soul of Microsoft. That meeting changed the company when they found that they didn't even know each other. And they worked together on a leadership team, right? So this is forcing that. And I think your conversation, and I think should be uber theme to take from this meeting, really, and I think, Kevin, you're spot on, is this, we need to focus on the overall well-being of our team members. And then, don't just say that. How do you institutionalize that? A lot of times the stuff we talk about, because it seems, like The Advantage, the book by Patrick, right? That book seems like it's too soft, a lot of his clients said, but then other clients were like, oh my God, that's exactly what I needed, right? Because that is our advantage, right? People are the advantage. So how do we lean in a little bit more to go to that next level? How do we optimize that experience and it begins with this caring and empathy thing we were talking about. So, I'm going to leave this conversation myself thinking about what am I going to do different because of that conversation of well-being, the overall well-being. So in regards to some specific things, do you want to get into that, Kaylee, and some specific things that we've had conversations on with teams in the past that can maybe help us? I can tell you, there's a lot of bad things going on and challenges that are associated with the pandemic that are having people work remotely, right? Such as there's a ton of fear going on right now. When you're not in the office, there's certain employees. Remember, everybody's different. And the key to leadership is to understand that human beings are all different. You have to be able to adapt and evolve to that. And so currently right now, you have some people that they're working remotely. It's like they didn't miss a beat. They don't care. They could deal with this fine. And there's other people like, no, this is a big challenge to them. And it's not because they're introverted or extroverted, just people are different, right? And so because of that fear, what do we do differently? And how do you lead differently? Access to information is a problem working remotely right now, right? Is some companies just aren't digitized. That's a problem. So there's information all over the place, and that causes a problem for this remote workforce. Some people are using old technology, and they don't have all these communication capabilities that are so critical right now to get the job done, right? There's a lot of hoarding that goes on anyways. But now when you're remote, for those people that fear their job and they're in an environment of forcing to compete versus collab, we have to change that. We have to have more of a collaborative environment versus compete. We're in these environments at home today where some people are actually able to hoard more, and that's the wrong thing. We don't want to do that. There's home distractions, right? That's back to this empathy. Do you understand your team's having these home distractions with the dog and the kids at school? And now everybody's, like for me right now, we're at home because both Marcy and I are at home because we have 2 kids in separate parts of the house right now. And every 2 minutes we're up there, something's not working or change this, change that. So there's that distraction. There's this isolation thing you talked about also. Certain people are having a big challenge in this time right now of feeling isolated. Not just because they're home from work, they're just away from their friends or away from their family. What do you do about that? How do you lean in as a leader during isolation? And there's a lot of different conversations we can have on that. Certain people require structure, other people don't. And during this pandemic right now, as a leader, you might want to figure out how do you help those that might need some more structure and more of a routine. And establishing rules of engagement of communications and making that a priority. I think also for leaders in terms of this environment, back on your question is, you have to recognize there's a lot of overperformers right now. And if you're not around, they're going to keep working. I had this in the Microsoft days before the pandemic that I used to have to get online, see people are active on email and stuff like that, and tell them to get offline, go to bed, right? Because some people, because they're working at home, they just forget what time it is, or they're just so in it, they're going to work more. And you want to make sure they have boundaries so they have their full balance in life as well, right? I will offer one thing that for a leader that's listening to this right now, one thing you can do that can make a big difference during this pandemic is to do the unexpected. And there are a lot of companies some great leaders that are doing this right now, where I'm not telling you to do your normal check-ins and your one-on-ones. I mean, hopefully you're doing that. That's table stakes. I'm talking about make the extra call when it's not expected. I mean, I used to do it all the time. I would make these calls to people, and at first they would be like, "Uh-oh, I'm not prepared for this conversation. What's the subject?" I'm like, "There's no subject. I'm checking. How you doing, man? What's going on? What's going on with what? No, what's just going on with your life? What's going on? How are things going over there?" It's these little minor check-ins that you think is a little thing. It's not a little thing. And I do them in a genuine way, right? Or you have a meeting coming up, a planned meeting, and all of a sudden the doorbell rings and all of a sudden pizza is delivered to one of your team members. Like someone just, yeah, and it was you that delivered the pizza, right? For your team. All of a sudden at once, your whole team's on the call. Next thing you know, someone's at the door and the whole team's going, there's pizza there. That's just these little unexpected cool things. I hear people are sending these little care packages in a cool way of you don't have to spend a ton of money, by the way, folks. You have to get crazy. You just got to be creative to demonstrate that you care, but these unexpected touch points. And you do it because you care, not because you're doing a manipulation game or whatever. Those little things right now make such a difference. And the winners do those kind of things.
I'll build on, in addition to what John's saying, I would say a couple of other things really stand out. I think leaders will help a lot in providing clarity. Everyone's got so much going on, and it just, with the work-life blend of just being ubiquitous, right?
Right.
And no commutes, no time out, no whatever that is, providing clarity on what matters most fits into the second one. And the second one fits into the well-being piece as well, which is, and John alluded to this, there's a lot of people out there right now that are suffering overload from too many types of collaborations or whatnot. There's a lot of value in understanding the information and knowledge flow within an organization, and who people are coming to, and there's a lot of pull to pull people in. But being aware, what are those signs of overload, and being able to address that goes a long way as well.
This conversation that you're proposing to people, I hope they're taken down, because it's this development that needs to be done for the leaders for the current time, this modernized development that's required. Kevin, I couldn't agree more with you. Back to what you said earlier, for isolation, for burnout, for all these different things, and for well-being, what are those triggers? What's an early morning detection that someone's fallen off the track a little bit? And then how do you go help? How do you, not expecting, how do you go help them? How do you create an environment where they'll tell you they're getting off track, right? But you got to ask some questions, right? But there could be some signs, like you said, and this is this new, I think, era of well-being, that how do we become more equipped to be better leaders with that and noticing those things? And again, this requires training. First of all, it requires wanting to do it, right? To caring about the people thing. Again,
John, it also, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, please.
No, there was something you brought up earlier, which I think is huge. This is hugely important too. It's how do you create, and frankly, I think this is a really interesting feature that Bullseye has. You know, I love the check-in feature with the technology, because that allows for that very frequent informal and formal type of check-ins when you need it. But I love the opportunity for people to raise hands, you know, and you've got to make it safe. You mentioned earlier around safety. You've got to create psychological safety within your organization to make it safe for someone to raise a hand and say, I'm tapping out here. This is what's happening, you know, or, you know, I know that you need to be able to have that level of comfort where someone could say, you know, John, in the team meeting, you laid out these priorities, you provided clarity in these priorities, but I got to tell you, I've got 10 number one priorities. You know, and I need to be able to talk with you on which ones align most with that and which ones don't, and where can I offshoot, or what can I do differently? That's really important as well.
And when you create the right culture, you allow people to do that. They have permission to do that, right?
Yeah.
Here's another thing to add to the mix here during this pandemic time. And, you know, although the pandemic, I hope and I believe, will go away over time, but we might not swing back to where we were in terms of how we work. I mean, I think that there's a lot of companies that says, maybe I don't need that many offices, and maybe this was some of the positive things that came out of this virus, which is I was forced to trust more when they delivered, right? And so maybe the remote workforce continues. It was going that direction anyways, I think, but now this kind of put some acceleration behind it. But one of the things while you're leading from remote, back to the engagement conversation, that will have your people kind of lean in more toward you and look at you differently, is every leader, we said this a little bit earlier, but you got to humanize yourself right now. And because you're a leader, it doesn't mean, and sometimes your employees will look to you as a leader like, well, they're not going through that, but everybody's going through this thing. And a way to maybe have some of your team members feel comfortable of expressing what they're going through and sharing more of the pain that they're going through the experience is by you leading, by sharing your pain. And I think I'm seeing really, really good leaders open up certain meetings by becoming vulnerable, like they never have before, where they're like, you know, sharing their stories about, and all of a sudden the employee's like, wow, you have that too? Well, of course, I have a family like you do. I got kids, right? And I have grandparents that I'm concerned about. And this has affected me too. So the more that you open up yourself to being human during this, I think that's pretty important. And one other thing I'll add to this, which is a complete different conversation, but important, is that because we're remote right now, and this caused a challenge in some of the engagement stuff, it doesn't need to cause as big a challenge. It could cause an opportunity. And I want to tell a quick story if I could. At Microsoft years ago, I thrived on offsite meetings. I always viewed offsite meetings as my differentiator, an opportunity to bring a team away from the office in a location, sometimes out of state, where I had their hearts and minds all together, no phones ringing, we got them away from everything, no distractions. And we could really deliver some great messaging, allow them to participate in cool ways, drive some things that will help them personally and professionally, have some fun, recognizing. This was my way of firing up the team, and it brought us so much closer together, right? I also created this thing called Leaders Forum, where, because I didn't think at the time Microsoft had enough opportunities for development for everybody, they had them for what we call the high performers, the hypos, which was just a smaller percent. But I tried to create other vehicles and made some things up of leadership programs so that everybody could participate in some kind of development. So one of them was called Leaders Forum. And in that leaders forum, we're going to go off site, and I had the teams picked, and they were all very different team members who didn't get to work with each other. This is when I was running a $6.2 billion business called the United States Commercial Sector Industries Organization, which is all the 4 major sectors, 23 verticals. But the job was for, the United States with a variety of different teams in every city. I picked individuals and diversity that never worked together to be on these teams to create certain things. Well, we couldn't go because it was a cost-cutting exercise during that time of no travel for a while. So we had to cancel the meeting. And my team came back to me and they're all disappointed they had to cancel the meeting. And I said, why do we have to cancel the meeting? Well, because we can't go to that. We don't have the money, the budget, no travel. So what does that have to do with canceling the meeting? We're Microsoft. We're proposing to our customers all this remote technology and collaboration tools. Why can't we have this? This could be an exercise to demonstrate that we're using our own stuff, eat our own dog food. Let's go. So my point is, the meeting went on, and these teams had to work remotely together via the technology that we sell to our customers. It turned out to be the funnest experience in a long time for these folks. It was work, but at the end of the day, they were more creative than they ever were. And here's my point. During this period that we're going through right now, doesn't mean that we have to take a step back. It could mean that we could take a step forward in terms of different things, in terms of our innovation, our creativity, in terms of becoming a better team. If we choose to be, if we're not the victim of this, but we use this as an opportunity to think differently and to work differently. So I bring that up because I think a lot of people right now have different perspectives on this. Your mindset's completely different from different leaders I talk to in different teams. This is an opportunity right now where you can lean in and actually grow as opposed to go backwards if you have the right mindset. And as far as engagement goes, I think a critical part of that obviously is the technology and the enablement of a lot of the things I talked about. In a deal, this is my compliment to you and your team, because I think that's what really Bullseye has done. If any company, when I look at these different tech companies, should be talked about more during these times, is a company like yourself and what you've built here, because you're enabling the kind of stuff that needs to get done without having to be in the office, and to really align to this real well-being conversation that Kevin's talking about for, this full connection to your people.
Well, thank you. Thank you, John. Not deviating, just inserting a quick thought and a question for Kevin. Kevin, how important, and I know that you love numbers and graphs and real-time information, and our quest to provide real-time information to people at all levels in organizations, unfiltered but real-time. How important is that, and what role it plays to keep people engaged?
I'll tell you what, I think clarity is key. And, again, it's, I tend to think, a deal, I think one thing that has impressed me so much about Bullseye, especially from the product side of things, is the dashboard that you provide leadership to be able to really understand in a very, narrow but incredibly deep way what the key indicators are to their organizational health in that regard. And again, organizational health is, define it how you will. Every organization has its own definition of it, but that includes both business outcomes as well as employee or talent outcomes, as well as, leadership and culture indicators, et cetera. All of that fits together. And, I think that having that level of visibility is incredibly important. And I'll bring it back a deal to something that, we had mentioned earlier about just the SEC. There is, if you think about the stakeholders from investors, the investment community for a while now has been, asking investor relations, corporate secretaries, CEOs, heads of HR on investor calls about give us insight into the cultural building blocks of your firm. Give us insight into the talent risk, asking very poignant questions, because these folks understand that the business, the corporate value equation has absolutely flipped over the last few decades, right? And it's gone from so much more plant, property, equipment, to so much more, in other words, tangibles, to so much more the intangibles, innovation, culture, talent, you can go on and on, purpose, the organization's purpose. These organizations realize that shift has occurred and that these things that were considered soft they are the hard ones to measure, but they deliver hard, very concrete impact. And I think it's incredibly important for organizations to have a mechanism that allows them to have complete visibility into what those leading indicators are that allow for those outputs and those lagging indicators.
Thank you. Kayleen?
Well,
can I add one thing real quickly though, about the technology side, what you just mentioned?
Please.
As a user of the technology for engagement for years and leading multiple teams through that, one of the most important things around the technology you're talking about, Kevin, I agree with the dashboards and stuff, is if it's not intuitive, if it's not integrated, then I'm not going to use it and my teams won't use it. It's got to be simple. It's got to be intuitive, because the currency of any application today is all about consumption, and if you don't use it, it doesn't matter. And I've had all kinds of different HR tools in my career that had every bell and whistle you can think about, but was just such a pain in the neck to operate and to participate in, for not only me as a leader but also the team members, because it's their input that goes into this, that it becomes a get it done kind of project as opposed to using it as an asset that you want to use. And what I found with Bullseye is this was different. It was the user interface it was pleasant, but the data and the way that it was presented was great, and the ability to reconfigure it was seamless and so simple for an average person. We didn't have to go to IT to do this. I mean, it was just click, 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 done. To get what you want and then to use it because you want to use it, not have to use it, that's a different tool. That's a different experience. And that's the kind of stuff that people are looking for today. And then to be able to use it on any platform, on any device, whether it's your phone or whether you're home with your PC or whatever. And I can't emphasize enough that you want to have technology, and I think that Bullseye has provided this technology to get you what you need, that you want to use, not have to use. And that makes a big difference. People will use it.
I think what we can take away from this is that there's this whole other piece of the puzzle, and it could be its own roundtable in and of itself. I think it's the development of not only your employees, but your leadership, who need to know, they don't need just the technology that facilitates the check-ins and the collaboration, even though that can be incredibly useful if it's as intuitive as you just explained, John. But the leaders, they need to know what to ask and how to lean into the softer side of their leadership, promote a culture that allows for this overall well-being of the workforce and overall organizational growth. And technology really should facilitate this. So maybe, Kevin, if you want to give us some insights as to what should someone be looking for in the technology that can facilitate the collaboration and the well-being of your workforce.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to have anything of value to add here, Kayleen. John is so much more, as a user of that type of technology than John would be vastly more valuable in what he's able to provide. We use technology at our firm. I'll tell you, I'm just kind of talking off the cuff here, right, with all of you. We use technology at our firm. Technology I think if there's anything I've learned is when to use technology and when not to use technology in the remote world, let's say, because everyone. I may be a very visual person, which I am. I enjoy looking at someone when I'm talking to someone. And that's really, really important, right? But that person may be in a moment where they don't want to be looked at or looking at me for whatever reason. And I've got to be vastly more attuned to that. So that's the type of takeaway that I would suggest that we're kind of feeling as a firm. I don't think that's lending much value, Kayleen, to the overall conversation here. What I would say is, let me close on this, because I feel like, you know, an organization is a system, and it's the understanding, you know, if you think, you know, getting back to engagement of what we were talking about, engagement as an outcome, right? Just like shareholder value is an outcome. And I love how John took shareholder value and brought it all the way back. 100%. The best executives from our vantage point, those that are leading organizations that are able to manage through an environment that's constantly changing, those executives really understand when it comes to the workplace and the workforce. They understand the interdependencies of 5 core areas and the interrelationships of these. And that's what I was trying to get at here with some of my comments, which is we are, every person who listens to this video is going to have one shared common experience. And that is that their organizations have felt a massive shock to the system in the COVID pandemic. And we'll just isolate it on that crisis, let alone the other crises that are happening. And because of that shock to the system, every organization has had to adjust its strategy to some degree or another. And for many organizations, that strategy was, our strategy right now is we got to get our people safe and get them out of the office and maintain some level of productivity possible. And now they're looking at what are the longer term implications and how do we, you know, what's it going to look like longer term? But every organization needs some, you know, those that do it best realize that when there is a shift in a business strategy, they've got to constantly look back and say whether and how that has an implication on their culture. Does our culture need to have some type of shift in order to now allow to really positively affect and not negatively impede that strategy from being executed? And derivative within that are the leadership. What are the leadership behaviors that are going to matter most to drive the culture that we want going forward, right? And what aren't we going to tolerate anymore? And how are we going to reflect that in our talent acquisition, performance management, succession, leadership development, learning and development, total rewards, all those pieces that support that? And then how does that affect our talent equation? You know, what are we going to need going forward? If for a lot of companies, this whole pandemic has facilitated the digitization of their business. And now they're looking and saying, holy mackerel, you know, maybe we need some skill sets differently. Maybe some roles we had are no longer relevant. There's a whole new bunch of roles that are going to be relevant. And we've got to be able to be known. We need to have a brand that's known to that new talent pocket or that talent out there. We need to know who they are. There's challenges there. But all of that is the system that the best organizations, when it comes to the workplace and the workforce, they're constantly looking at those 5 elements. And so, you know, shifting markets, how does our strategy adjust? What are the cultural, leadership, and talent implications? How do we fit all together? All of those, when they're worked well, are going to lead to the outcome of higher employee engagement, which is going to drive the shareholder value, et cetera. That's what I would like to lead people on, because it's that line of thinking that you cannot lose track of, especially in a very chaotic, continuous environment of continuous disruption.
Excellent. Well said. Excellent points from you, excellent points from John. All I can tell you, and I predict that there are conferences and there are conversations that people view on LinkedIn and other media. And they say, well, I hope it ends. And I believe such a passionate speakers we have here and such, you know, insights that our viewers of this roundtable would be asking Kayleen, when is the second episode coming of this conversation? Because, you know, we are leaving so much out there that yeah. And I enjoyed this thoroughly. And I'm very passionate about this subject myself. but listening to John and Kevin is amazing. They take you on a journey, and they really humanize this whole conversation, and they unpack it in a very different way than what I have heard from other speakers. So thank you so much, and Kevin, for the insights. Thank you so much, John. But John, I would like you to give your closing comments as well.
Well, I don't know what more I can add to what Kevin just said, because I think he's spot on. I think a lot of this is a choice of how I want to move forward. I think a lot of these companies right now, as I said earlier, are victimized by the current situation. And then there's other companies right now that are seeing that it's a time for, they're humanizing themselves, but they're also, as they humble themselves, they're realizing it's a time for adjustments, recalibration, and change. And they're flexible and fluid enough to make those changes, and they're confident enough to make those changes, which I think is important. You mentioned, and you asked a question at the end there, Kayleen, like, well, as we build out, what would be some of the ways that we would, maybe build out some of these tools and technology? And in my comment back to you would be, start from the best applications that I know and the best solutions I know, start from ground up. Have your teams build them. And the beauty of what Adil has built right now, the flexibility of his solution, is they can be built in minutes, not all this integration costs and everything else. It can take a year. So if you're looking at opportunities where you want to adapt to the new behaviors that are required today as leaders, so you can better serve your team members, ask your team members what their challenges are and where we need to improve. I mean, at Microsoft, for example, or at any team that I've led, I created what I called the Pulse, which would be a very diverse group of leaders and team members and individual contributors throughout my entire organization to get their feedback. I put them in leadership roles for this Pulse team to go back to their constituents and whatever discipline they work in to get the feedback and represent that back in these Pulse meetings in a very confidential way, obviously. But I would always want to know what's going on in the field, what's the pulse, and what can we do to take action on it. And some of the kind of things that you're suggesting in terms of how we can improve should come from the field upward, the people that are impacted the most. So to help answer that question. Closing comments, Adil, I would just say this. Employee engagement is all about caring and enabling an environment that will allow you to unleash the human potential and your corporate potential. It's about growth, but it's about growth for both, as I said earlier. It's about growth for your company, but I think you should start with pivoting. It's about growth for your people. And they want to participate more, they want to be engaged more, but you just have to kind of let go to let grow, as I said earlier, and trust and empower more. So that takes place. And then you got to provide them, as I talk about the enablement side of this, you got to provide them with the tools to be able to be most successful in this conversation. And that leads to companies like yourself that I think are doing a great job of that. So I'm optimistic that this pandemic has caused a wake-up call to force more of this conversation. We're having more courageous conversations around this employee engagement, and it's not just this term that's a soft term anymore. It's actually something that people get. And I'm seeing companies take it more serious. And hopefully when we have the next webinar or sometime in the future, we look back and we see the Gallup polls start to change a little bit. And we start to see that the improvement in terms of employee engagement and the improvement of those people that were passively disengaged move toward more actively engaged. So I just want to compliment you on what you're doing, and thank you for providing this as a service to other people to maybe learn a couple things from it. It was an honor to be here with Kevin, who I think is a thought leader in this subject from a research perspective, and thank you for what you're building over there. It's making a difference for a lot of clients, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John. And this is a continued dialogue and conversation. Hope to see you on another roundtable soon.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kayleen.
Thanks, Kelly.